Hello and welcome to my specialization introduction and open world content guides for the Frost Death Knight in World of Warcraft Battle for Azeroth. If you haven't watched the primer video for this video series, please go ahead and do that. There's going to be a link to that video in the description below. It's going to catch you up on what we're doing and why, and you only have to watch it one time and then you'll be able to understand what we're doing in each of these videos, and it saves everybody a lot of time. So let's jump in here on the Frost Death Knight. Before we get started, I want to let you know that these are the talents you can select to fulfill the requirements that we laid out in the primer video. So once you've done that, we're going to go ahead and start sorting our spells. Now I'm not going to go deep into what each of these spells does. I'm going to give you a description of what it does, and that will help you understand why it's going into the section that it is going into. Anti-Magic Shell is a damage reduction cooldown that's going to go into our defensive cooldown area. Chains of Ice is a crowd control ability that slows the target. That goes in our crowd control section. Control Undead lets us control an undead creature, but sometimes we won't be able to do that because there's no undead around, or if we can, it's something we generally want to do out of combat, so we're going to put that in our miscellaneous abilities over here. Dark Command is the Death Knight taunt that does have some limited combat application in the open world. You can use it to get a melee enemy to come over to you, but we're going to put it on the right hand side of our combat utility area because we're not really going to be using it all that much out in the open world. Deathgate is our nice ability that teleports us back to Ebb and Hold. That's something we're going to do out of combat. Goes in our miscellaneous spells section. Death Grip is a combat utility ability. It pulls an enemy to us. Death Strike is part of our core rotation. Death's Advance is on a longer cooldown, but it's a movement ability, and I always put those in combat utility because you want to be using those as often as you can, even if you're just trying to run faster down a hallway. Empower Rune Weapon is an offensive cooldown ability that will give us haste and resource regeneration. Frost Strike is part of our core rotation. Howling Blast is part of our core rotation. Icebound Fortitude is a damage reduction and stun immunity ability. It goes in our defensive cooldown section. Mind Freeze is an interrupt. It goes in our crowd control section. Obliterate is part of our core rotation. Path of Frost allows us to walk or run on water whether we're mounted or not, but it is removed when you are hit in combat. So usually you're going to be using that out of combat to travel from place to place. So we're going to put that over here in our miscellaneous spells section. Pillar of Frost is an offensive cooldown that gives us increased strength. So that's going to go in our offensive cooldown area. Raise Ally is something we can use in open world content. It's a battle res. It allows you to resurrect a friendly player while you're in combat. Chances are we're not going to be using that too much in open world content though, so we're going to put it over here as well. Remorseless Winter is part of our core rotation. And finally, Rune Forging is something we can do back at Ebb and Hold to enchant our weapons and get some passive bonuses from those. So we're going to put that over here in the miscellaneous section as well, because that's not something that we're doing in combat. Okay, so those are all of our spells, all of our basic spells sorted. Next, we're going to talk about the resources available to the Frost Death Knight. The Frost Death Knight has two types of resources. It has Frost Runes. You start combat with 6 Frost Runes. Generally, you're going to spend these, and as you spend those, you'll be using abilities that generate runic power, which is your second resource. You'll then use runic power to cast other abilities and deal more damage. So, spend your Frost Runes, build up your runic power, spend your runic power to deal damage, and while you're doing that, your Frost Runes will automatically be regenerating so that you can use them again, and that's kind of the cycle. So let's talk about the core rotation for the Frost Death Knight. So you're going to open up combat with Howling Blast. This costs one of your frost runes. It does damage to a target and then damage to enemies around that target. And to all those enemies, it also applies a damage over time debuff called Frost Fever that lasts for 24 seconds. So you open with that, you get some nice AoE damage all over everybody, and then you can go into Remorseless Winter. So Remorseless Winter is on a 20-second cooldown. It costs 1 rune, and it does AoE damage around you. It lasts for 8 seconds, so you're going to get that AoE damage from your Howling Blast, that AoE damage from Remorseless Winter, and then you're going to want to keep spending more runes. So that takes care of 2 runes. You want to spend more runes because you want to generate that runic power so that you can spend that on abilities. So the next thing you start doing is you start using Obliterate. Obliterate costs 2 runes. It's a single target ability that just does a nice chunk of damage to whatever you're targeting. So you're spending those runes, you're generating runic power. What do you spend the runic power on? Well, normally you're going to be spending your runic power on Frost Strike. Frost Strike costs 25 runic power, single target ability, does a nice little chunk of damage, spend some of that runic power. If you need to heal, if for some reason you're taking a good amount of damage, or you just want to top yourself off, you can instead spend your runic power on Death Strike. Death Strike costs 45 runic power, does a nice chunk of damage, and also heals you for a minimum of 10% of your max health. But it can heal you for a significantly larger amount than that if you've been taking a lot of damage recently. So let's go take a look at how this rotation will work. So we'll come down here to the target dummy. So we're going to open up with our Howling Blast, hit our Remorseless Winter, start spending our runes on Obliterate, and you're going to see that's going to build up our runic power, so then we can spend that on Frost Strike. While we're doing this, our runes are regenerating so that we can, again, hit our Obliterates if we need to, or if our target is about to run out of Frost Fever, we'll want to do Howling Blast again to make sure that that's always on them. So, Howling Blast, Remorseless Winter, start using Obliterates, spend our runic power on Frost Strikes. If we need to heal, we can spend that runic power on a nice Death Strike instead. And that's how the basic rotation of the Frost Death Knight works. Now, I'm sure you're wondering what these graphics are that are popping up all around the character. Well, that's where we get into the passive abilities of the Death Knight. So the Frost Death Knight has 2 key passive abilities that are going to influence the way your core rotation works. The first one is called Killing Machine. This one gives your auto attack critical strikes a chance to make your next Obliterate automatically critical strike. So when this happens, as you're attacking, you're going to get some criticals from your auto attacks, and those criticals will have a chance to cause a frost graphic to show up on both sides of your character, and your Obliterate is going to flash yellow and be all shiny, and that means that you can hit that Obliterate and it's guaranteed to critically hit. So it's guaranteed to do a nice chunk of damage. It does still cost 2 runes, so you have to factor that in to your rune management, but it's going to hit really hard. The second passive ability that we need to pay attention to is called Rhyme. Rhyme makes your Obliterate, which we just talked about, have a 45% chance to cause your next Howling Blast, which is the ability we're opening combat with, consume no runes, so it'll be free, and deal 300% additional damage. So, when that happens, as you're hitting your Obliterates, you're going to see a frost graphic pop up above your character, and you're going to see Howling Blast flash yellow. When that happens, you know that you can cast Howling Blast for free, and it's going to hit pretty hard. Now, the reason that's important is, A, because free damage is always great, but also you're going to get this often enough that it's going to keep that Frost Fever up on your target pretty much constantly without you having to keep track of it. So it kind of makes it a little bit easier to make sure that you're doing the optimum amount of damage possible. So let's go down again. We're going to check out this basic rotation. And we're going to pay attention this time for those Killing Machine and Rhyme procs. So we go up, we're going to hit our Howling Blast, we're going to do our Remorseless Winter, we're going to hit our Obliterate, and there we go. We got a Rhyme proc. So you can see the graphic here above us. That means we can cast Howling Blast for free. And then our Killing Machine proc is here on the side, and that means our Obliterate will critically strike. And we got a Howling Blast again. We can spend some Runic Power on our Frost Strike. Okay, we got another Howling Blast. There we go. And you can see how this kind of cycles. Now the thing you want to make sure that you're doing with all this is you never want to have full runes, if you can help it, in an open world situation, because you're just trying to mow down enemies. And you also don't want to max out your runic power. So right there, I maxed out my runic power. You don't want to do that. You want to spend runic power as often as you can to make sure that you're not generating runic power that you don't get to use. And that's it. That's how the core rotation works. That's how the passives come into play for the Frost Death Knight. There's one other passive that we'll want to pay attention to, but we'll talk about that in our outdoor content demo. The Frost Death Knight does have a couple of completely passive, don't affect your gameplay at all abilities as well. Runic Empowerment gives you the chance to generate runes when you spend runic power. Nothing you can do about that. Frozen Heart is just an increase to your frost damage. On a Pale Horse gives you 20% mounted speed. So, alright, now that we have taken a look at the core rotation of the Death Knight, we're going to jump into our talent tree, and we're going to create a build that's going to work well in open world content. Thank you, Bells. So, I have this build ready. We're going to select everything that we need here. Okay. Alright, this is the build that I recommend that you use in open world content. It's not the only build that you can use at all, but it's the one that I like to play and the one that I enjoy and have fun with, and I think you will too. So let's go into each talent and talk about why they're important to the build. So first off, we have Icy Talons. This causes your runic power spending abilities, that would be our Frost Strike and our Death Strike, to increase your melee attack speed by 5% for 6 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. So we can get 3 stacks of Icy Talons by using Frost Strike and Death Strike, which will give us 15% increased melee attack speed. So our auto attacks will be going a lot faster. Then we have Runic Attenuation. Your auto attacks, which will be going faster because of Icy Talons, have a chance to generate 3 runic power. So this creates a cycle where as we spend our Frost Strikes and Death Strikes, we get those stacks. We're attacking faster with our auto attacks, and those auto attacks have a chance to generate the runic power, which we can then spend on Frost Strikes and Death Strikes. Now the third part to this is Permafrost. Permafrost gives your auto attacks damage the ability to grant you an absorb shield equal to 40% of the damage dealt. So we're attacking faster, we're generating runic power, but we're also putting up this shield that helps prevent a lot of damage that we take from our enemies. So those are the kind of synergistic talents that we have that kind of make the core of the build here, and then everything else just kind of helps out in some way or another. So Death's Reach makes our Death Grip, which is our combat utility ability that pulls someone in. It extends the range by 10 yards, making it a 40-yard ability, which is huge. And anytime we kill an enemy that gives us experience or honor, it resets the cooldown of Death Grip. Now, Death Grip doesn't cost anything, it just has a cooldown. So we can pull an enemy in, we can nuke them down, then our cooldown on Death's Grip gets reset. We can turn, we can pull another enemy in, nuke them down, turn, and repeat this in all over and over again, and essentially you could stand in one spot and just kind of kill everything in a circle around you without even having to move. So that's really handy with a Death Knight in particular, because the Death Knight class does not have a lot of mobility. You're kind of slow, you don't have a lot of ways to get around, so being able to pull stuff to you is really, really nice. We have Frost Scythe. This is the only active ability in this build, so it's the only extra thing you kind of have to worry about. And it's pretty simple. What Frost Scythe is it is an AoE Obliterate. So you can use Frost Scythe the exact same way you would use Obliterate, but if you're fighting one enemy, you use Obliterate. If you're fighting 2, 3, 4 enemies, you use Frost Scythe. Now, the cool thing about Frost Scythe is we went over Killing Machine. Your auto attack critical chance or critical strikes have a chance to make your next Obliterate automatically critically strike. That also applies to Frost Scythe. So Frost Scythe will also flash yellow, and you can use it and get a guaranteed critical hit against multiple targets. And when we were looking at Rime, where our Obliterate has the chance to cause our next Howling Blast to be free and deal a lot of damage, so does Frost Scythe. So it's literally, you use it the exact same way you would Obliterate. It costs 1 less rune, it does a little bit less damage, but that's because it hits all the targets around you. So just remember, single target, Obliterate. Multiple targets, Frost Scythe. Use them the exact same way. Next up, we have Gathering Storm. Each rune spent during Remorseless Winter, which is our ability that we've been hitting after we cast Howling Blast, which I'm going to bump this over here. Each rune spent during Remorseless Winter increases its damage by 10% and extends its duration by half a second. So we're going to tweak our opening rotation just a little bit, and we're going to start with Remorseless Winter, then cast Howling Blast. And the reason we're going to do this is because if we cast Remorseless Winter first, it's going, and then the one rune that we spend to cast Howling Blast contributes towards Gathering Storm, and we get a 10% damage increase on our Remorseless Winter and extend the duration by half a second. Then we start using our Obliterate or our Frost Scythe, spending those runes and increasing the damage of Remorseless Winter as well. And then finally, Ice Cap, your Frost Strike, Frost Scythe, and Obliterate. So these three here. The critical strikes from those reduce the remaining cooldown on Pillar of Frost by 1 second. Now, Pillar of Frost is something we haven't really talked about. It's one of our offensive cooldowns that we put over here. It normally has a 45-second cooldown. It increases our strength by 15% for 15 seconds, and then when we spend runes, it keeps increasing our strength. Okay, it's a button you hit to do more damage. Well, with a 45-second cooldown in the open world, you're going to be able to kill several enemies in 45 seconds. So if you hit this for one of them, it lasts for 15 seconds, then you have 30 seconds of nothing where you're not getting this buff, which makes it a little inefficient. However, with Ice Cap, we're always going to be using our Obliterates and our Frost Strikes and our Frost Scythes. So when those crit, we're going to be reducing the cooldown of Pillar of Frost, which means more than likely we'll have 15 seconds of Pillar of Frost, 15 seconds of nothing, and then another 15 seconds of Pillar of Frost. And that's a lot better, and it makes it into an ability that we can use a lot more often in open world content. So let's go down and we're going to check out how this build plays against the target dummy. So as I said before, we're going to come up, we're going to open with Remorseless Winter and then hit our Howling Blast, and then we'll start using our Obliterates into our Frost Strikes. So let's just do the first chunk of this, right? So we hit Remorseless Winter, we hit our Howling Blast, that's going to give us Gathering Storm. And you can see that Gathering Storm is stacking as we are spending runes. We're up to 50% now, so that's nice. Okay. So we do those. We start spending our runes, right? If we're in a single target situation, you can see we've got a Killing Machine proc here, and it's flashing on both Obliterate and Frost Scythe. So single target, we Obliterate. Multiple targets, we Frost Scythe, and you can see we hit both of these targets. It's got a pretty good range on it. Now the thing to remember with Frost Scythe is it hits targets in front of you, not all around you. So you want to make sure you're facing the enemies that you're trying to hit. Okay, so we have built up our runic power quite a bit. You can see that over here, we're getting our frost shield. This is one of the talents that we picked. Our permafrost is giving us that. We have right now 21,000 health, and this is giving us a 4,000 damage shield. And this shield does refresh with our auto attacks. So right now, we're attacking, you know, a pretty decent pace for a melee character. But you're going to see, as we start to spend runic power on these frost strikes, we're going to see that Icy Talons buff pop up here. And we're going to start attacking faster. So let's do that. We're going to hit Frost Scythe. You can see we have Icy Talons, 5% attack speed. Let's do it again. And do it again. So now we are attacking. We have 15% increased attack speed. Okay, and that is helping us to generate runic power. It's helping us to keep our shield up. So what you want to do with this build is you want to make sure that once you get to the point where you're able to use your Frost Strikes, you're going to play a little game. Frost Strike is going to give you Icy Talons, and it lasts 6 seconds. You're going to want to make sure that you can always Frost Strike before this goes away. That way you can keep that 15% attack speed constant. So you're going to want to be kind of weaving between like a Howling Blast into a Frost Strike, an Obliterate into a Frost Strike, a Frost Scythe into a Frost Strike. So you can keep that 15% up at all times. And that's the way the build works. The other thing that we had there is if you did go up, and let's say we do our opening rotation again, we're going to add in Pillar of Frost there. And we're just going to go ahead and see if we can lower our cooldown. So this right here is that's gonna take it down by a second. We can get some criticals on some frost strikes here. That's gonna help us out. So you can see we're already down to 20 seconds on our cooldown there. We can use our Remorseless Winter again. And we're just kind of eating away at that cooldown. So it definitely has not been 45 seconds, and we are able to use Pillar of Frost again. Okay, so that is how this build works. Before we go and take this build out into the open world and test it against some actual enemies, we are going to jump back into our talent tree one more time, and we're going to take a look at the PvP talents. The talents that I recommend if you're going to toggle on War Mode but you want to focus mainly on PvE are Relentless. This turns your Honorable Medallion into a passive ability that you don't even have to think about. It reduces the duration of all incoming crowd control effects by 20%. Doesn't matter what type of crowd control effect it is, it gets reduced. That's easy, set it and forget it. Next, Decomposing Aura. All enemies within 10 yards slowly decay, losing up to 3% of their max health every 2 seconds. Stacks up to 5 times. So you can get this aura around you that is dealing 15% max health damage to the enemies around you just by being there. So this is a nice ability to have to just kind of passively help increase the damage you deal and kill those enemies significantly faster, especially if you have, several that you're fighting at the same time. Next, we have Overpowered Rune Weapon. This reduces the cooldown and duration of Empower Rune Weapon by 50%. Now, this is another ability we haven't really touched on. It's our other offensive cooldown ability. Empowers our rune weapon, and we gain 15% haste, so even faster attack speed, which goes with our build. And you start generating 1 rune and 5 runic power instantly, and then you get the same amount every 5 seconds for 20 seconds. So you get resource regeneration as well, which will help you spam all those abilities, keep your attack speed buff up. Now, the reason that this PvP talent is really good is because at a 2-minute cooldown and lasting for 20 seconds, usually if you're hitting this, you're killing stuff really fast, a lot faster than 20 seconds. Then you have to wait 2 minutes until you can do something similar again. So it's kind of wasted. You know, you can use it on cooldown just for the heck of it, or you can save it for elite or rare mobs. However, with the overpowered rune weapon talent here, we reduce the cooldown by a minute, which means we can use it a lot more often, and we also reduce the duration by 10 seconds. And 10 seconds is just fine in open world content, because 10 seconds with a buff like this means we're getting a lot of stuff killed really quickly, and then we only have to wait half as long to be able to use this ability again. So it makes it a much more suitable ability to use in open world content. And then finally we have Chill Shriek. This is a instant ability, 45-second cooldown with a 40-yard range. It deals up to 3% of the target's total health in frost damage, reduces their movement speed, okay? But it can bounce up to 9 times between the closest targets. So this is it's a shorter cooldown. It's still kind of an offensive cooldown ability, and that's where I would put it. But it gives you another button you can push to do some damage. Works pretty good in an AoE situation as well with the bounce on it. So those are the talents that I would recommend if you're going to go off and do PvE content with War Mode toggled on. So we've covered everything. All that's left is the demonstration. So I'm going to cut to that, and I'll see you there. Alright, so we're back here in Suramar City, and we are going to just drop down and put ourselves into some different combat situations. First thing we're going to do is try to take on just a single target here. So we'll come down. We can death grip this guy over if we need to. I clicked off of him there. Alright, so we're going to open up with our Remorseless Winter. We're going to hit our Howling Blast. We're going to a single target, so we're going to use our Obliterate. Alright, so now we can death grip this guy over. And we're going to talk about this ability here. So you're going to see that our Death Strike is shining. And the reason for that is the other passive ability that all Death Knights have, which is called Dark Sucker. When you kill an enemy that yields experience or honor, your next Death Strike within 20 seconds is free and heals for an additional 10% of maximum health. So we can Death Strike for free. After we kill an enemy. So in addition to being able to yank someone over, we can get a free chunk of damage on them. Now, we showed off the full rotation against the target dummy, but honestly, when you're out there in the open world, you can simplify this rotation quite a bit. Oh, look, we got a piece of treasure. You can simplify this rotation quite a bit. And so, for example, we can yank this guy in, we can cast our free Death Strike, hit Howling Blast, cast Obliterate a couple times if we need to until we run out of runes, and then just start spamming Frost Strike, and we can kill him that way. So what we're going to do now is we're going to round up a couple of these guys. See if we can get a few of them here, and we're going to show off how you would use. So we would Remorseless Winter, Howling Blast. We can start casting our Frost Scythe now. If we need to heal a little bit, we hit Death Strike, and that tops us off. We can Death Strike again. We've got a free Howling Blast. Alright, so we just start casting our Frost Strike here to get our attack speed going up. Alright. Recast our Remorseless Winter. We're keeping that 15% attack speed up with our Icy Talons. And there we go. Alright, so now that we've kind of shown that off against single targets and against multiple enemies, what we want to do, we're going to go fight this rare spawn over here and kind of show how this would work out for us. So we'll drop down here, and we can do the same thing on these guys. Remorseless Winter. We're going to do our Howling Blast, start casting our Frost Strike, or Frost Scythe, sorry. Go ahead and yank this guy over. Alright, so what you're going to do after you get the core rotation of this build down is you'll start incorporating your other abilities. So, you know, let's say I was worried about taking too much damage from this enemy, I could use my Icebound Fortitude or Anti-Magic Shell. I would look over here in the defensive section and say, well, what are the tools I have that might help me out? Or say I want to kill him a little bit faster. Well, then I would look down here at my offensive cooldown abilities and use those. So you start looking in the different areas and finding other abilities that you can use. So for this guy, we're actually going to use both of these cooldowns. Our offensive cooldowns, do our standard rotation, and he's probably going to die really quickly. So we're going to pull him over. We're going to hit Pillar of Frost. We're going to hit Empower Rune Weapon, Remorseless Winter, into Howling Blast. And then we're going to start using our Obliterates. Cast some Frost Strikes to get our attack speed up. And he is dead. Alright, and these guys are back. Nice. No, I didn't, Beta. Alright, and that is the guide. That's an example of how the build would play. Essentially, if you have an enemy with more health and you don't have your cooldowns available to use, then you would follow the rotation that we did against the target dummy, where you would do your Remorseless Winter, Howling Blast, spend runes with Obliterate to get your Frost Strikes, spend those to get your attack speed up, and then just start weaving so you can keep that 15% attack speed. So I hope this guide has helped you out. I hope that you have the confidence now to be able to get on your own Frost Death Knight, take this build and start trying out some open world content, and see if this specialization is one that you'd like to play in Battle for Azeroth. Thanks for joining me. Hit the like button if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe and hit the bell if you want to see more videos like this. And either way, I hope you just have a fun time in Battle for Azeroth. Thank you.